Behold, the beauty that is Indonesia, Mother Nature's gift of serene and colorful landscapes, where diversity makes us one, united towards a common goal, where resiliency is achieved together. A strong infrastructure governance arising, where investments are waiting to flourish, and where creativity is inspired by tradition. Indonesia, where beautiful possibilities are offered.
Indonesia, a land of breathtaking nature and rich culture. There are many things Indonesians are proud of. One-of-a-kind photogenic spots spread all over the nation, unique wildlife, magnificent cultural heritage, and the most recent one, the G20 presidency. Indonesia is proud to hold the 2022 G20 presidency. As a multilateral forum connecting the world's major economies, the G20 holds a strategic role in securing global economic growth and stability. Together, the G20 members represent more than 80% of world GDP, 75% of international trade, and 60% of the world population. And 2022 is the year that Indonesia plays a major role in leading the G20 discussions on various global issues. Not an easy task amid a global pandemic that still continues after more than 2 years. Holding the presidency in this unique moment where countries are struggling to bounce back from COVID-19, Indonesia introduces Recover Together, Recover Stronger as the main theme of its presidency. As a step toward an even, sustainable recovery, 6 priority agendas are introduced in the finance track. Exit strategy to support recovery, addressing scarring effect to secure future growth, payment systems in the digital era, sustainable finance, digital financial inclusion, and international taxation. Through these agendas, the Indonesian presidency aims to engage all G20 members and invitees in discussions and deliberations that goes beyond just the interest of advanced economies. Considerations also need to be put for other countries that may still be struggling to manage the pandemic. Because coming out of the pandemic, no one should be left behind. Recover together, recover stronger. At the end of 2021, we've paved the road to 2022's G20 presidency, promoting Recover Together, Recover Stronger as its main theme. The first Finance and Central Bank Deputies meeting in the Indonesian presidency has established 6 priority agendas in the finance track that will be discussed throughout 2022. Now, it's time to get the wheels turning. One of the most crucial agenda in the Indonesian presidency is exit strategy to support recovery. COVID-19 has led to a severe global recession. In response, countries have taken unprecedented fiscal and monetary policies to protect the economy. These policies, along with the distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, has brought positive outcomes. Economic activities had begun to resume. Nevertheless, recovery doesn't come as a one-size-fits-all item. Advanced economies are recovering much faster than their emerging markets counterpart, while low-income countries are lagging. The different timings of exit policies can potentially bring negative spillover effect for countries. To mitigate these risks, a well-planned, well-calibrated, and well-communicated exit strategy is needed. Under Indonesia's presidency, the G20 countries and invitees will work together to create policy settings for a smooth exit strategy. Discussions will be held in the working group level as well as high-level meetings. For it is our duty to ensure that emerging from this pandemic, no one gets left behind. Recover together, recover stronger.
Hari ini ada rencana kemana? Kamu masih aktif kerja di luar ya? Masa pandemi gini memang banyak sektor yang terkena dampaknya. Cuma beberapa sektor strategis aja yang boleh beroperasi, tentu dengan berbagai syarat yang harus dipenuhi. Ada sih yang beruntung masih bisa kerja dari rumah, tapi banyak juga yang tetap harus keluar untuk cari uang, kayak kamu. Kalau gitu harus didukung dengan stamina yang kuat dan protokol kesehatan yang ketat. Kamu udah bawa masker cadangan kan? Hand sanitizer juga jangan lupa. Jaga kebersihan dan rajin cuci tangan ya. Aku gak akan bosan ngingetin kamu soal ini. Jauhi kerumunan dan hindari kontak fisik dengan orang lain. Kalau ada keperluan transaksi sehari-hari, mending pakai cara pembayaran non-tunai aja. Kan udah banyak tempat yang nyediain cara pembayaran pakai kris. Tinggal scan kode krisnya pakai aplikasi pembayaran di handphone. Lebih aman kan bayar tanpa bersentuhan? Aku sadar, meski sama-sama menghadapi pandemi, kita punya perjuangan yang berbeda-beda. Tapi dalam menghadapi virus ini, kita harus saling jaga. Jaga diri biar nggak ketularan, dan jaga jarak biar nggak menularkan sekitar. Yuk pakai masker 2 lapis. Semangat kerjanya!
The G20 is a very important forum for all of us. We know that this is affecting majority of the global economy, trade, as well as investment.
With the humble and hospitality of Indonesia, welcome. We achieved some promising progress through multilateral, through G20.
Behold, the beauty that is Indonesia, Mother Nature's gift of serene and colorful landscapes, where diversity makes us one, united towards a common goal, where resiliency is achieved together. A strong infrastructure governance arising, where investments are waiting to flourish, and where creativity is inspired by tradition. Indonesia, where beautiful possibilities are offered.
Indonesia, a land of breathtaking nature and rich culture. There are many things Indonesians are proud of. One-of-a-kind photogenic spots spread all over the nation, unique wildlife, magnificent cultural heritage, and the most recent one, the G20 presidency. Indonesia is proud to hold the 2022 G20 presidency. As a multilateral forum connecting the world's major economies, the G20 holds a strategic role in securing global economic growth and stability. Together, the G20 members represent more than 80% of world GDP, 75%.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan. The Honorable Governor of Bank Indonesia, His Excellency Mr. Peri Warjio, Head of the Audit Board of Republic of Indonesia, Mr. Agung Firman Sampurna, Board of Governor of Bank Indonesia, Honorable Central Bank Governors from partner countries, distinguished speakers, all of us, respected guests who are here with us in Jakarta Convention Center, and all audience who are attending this event via virtual platform. A very good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me, Nadira Titalia, to be your host for today's event. Welcome to high-level discussion, Recover Together, Sinergi of Safeguarding the Momentum. Ladies and gentlemen, this auspicious event is the final event of G20 Finance Track Side Event Series hosted by Bank Indonesia. Financial sector resilience will continue to be tested in line with emerging yet persistent structural changes, including those arising from non-bank financial sector, technological information, and climate change. The increasing complexity of macro financial linkage provide challenge to the policy-making process. Therefore, synergy and policy innovation are the keys to promote economic recovery and maintain stability. This high-level discussion is expected to synergize and broaden the international perspective among advanced economies and emerging markets so that we may recover together. Ladies and gentlemen, before we start, allow me to kindly ask Deputy Governor Dodi Badialio to deliver his welcoming remarks. Deputy Governor, the stage is yours.
Very good morning, Your Excellency, Governor of Bank Indonesia, also all the honorable speakers. Here we have friends from FSB coming with us. And Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Allow me to open this, I will say this is the last day of the Side Event of Bank Indonesia. We're proud to have today a high-level discussion. We just finished yesterday with the main meetings on the G20 of the financial ministers and central bank governors. We have come up with a series of the communique. Two of the points that we can deliver here is the need for the countries to exit smoothly from the pandemic, to have a good recovery, and the second also how all the countries able to maintain a strong financial stability during we are exit from the recovery from the pandemic. I think the point here is very timely for us to have 2 points relate with the communique that we already delivered. First, how we exit from the pandemic in the real sectors, and the second, how we also exit smoothly in the financial sectors. So we are proud here to have discussion. In the session 1, we have the topic on the how we able to, I will read, how we able to have policy normalization and global growth momentum. I think that's related with the communicate, number one, and number two, to have a smooth recovery, and the second, how we able to have a global financial stability and its new challenge. This is related with the point number 12 of the communique. I think for here, I mean, we're proud to have all the speakers. In the session one, we have a very strong speakers, sound speakers, prominent speakers from the governor of Bank Indonesia and also from the OECD. And the second session will be coming from all the experts from the FSB and also from Central Bank governors of Australia and also our deputy governor. Without further ado, I want back to the moderator, to the MC, to open and lead the discussion on number one and number two. Thank you very much, and have I will have what I will say. Have a good and also a strong discussion, and also have a nice day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Governor Dodi Budiwaluyo, for your welcoming remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, today's high-level discussion will be divided into two sessions, and shortly we will begin our first with the theme of policy normalization and global growth momentum. This first session will be moderated by Indonesian TV anchor and Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Metro TV, Jakarta. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please give a warm welcome to our moderator, Ms. Kania Sutisnawinata.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Hello, good morning, Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen joining us here and also through our digital platform. Welcome to the G20 Finance Track Side Events, high-level discussion, Recover Together, Sinergi on safeguarding the momentum. Let me introduce myself. My name is Kania Sutisnawinata, and it's an honor for me to be moderating for this session for the next 1 hour. As was also briefly mentioned in the beginning, the topic of our discussion, as we can see, the momentum of recovery post-pandemic is underway this year. Stability of the global macroeconomic is surviving the COVID-19 pandemic. Yet, as was also mentioned earlier, the scarring impact of the COVID-19 pandemic remains. Structural issues such as the need to push productivity need to be addressed, and then financial sector resilience is also continually tested, as was mentioned earlier, with emerging structural changes coming from non-bank financial sector and also technological innovation and climate change. So this current complexity in micro-financial linkages is, of course, providing a challenge in the policy-making process. So therefore, we'd like to highlight that synergy and also policy innovations are seen to be the keys in promoting a sustained economic recovery and also maintaining stability. And to discuss more on these issues, it is my honor. We have joining us two prominent speakers, two very strong speakers, to be able to share their views and also insight and jumpstart the discussion. First, to join us on stage, I would like to invite the Governor of Bank Indonesia, His Excellency Peri Warjio. Please welcome. Good morning. Hello, Governor. Such a pleasure to have you with us. It's the last day, the concluding sessions. Before we start, I'd like to maybe perhaps give a brief introduction of Governor Peri. Prior to serving as Governor of Bank Indonesia, he served as Deputy Governor of Bank Indonesia from 2013 to 2018. And has also served as Assistant Governor for Monetary, Macroprudential, and International Policy. And prior to that, held an important position for 2 years. That's right, Governor? As the Executive Director at the International Monetary Fund. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you're keeping yourself healthy, and we're also adhering to really strict health protocols. We're wearing our mask, yes, in this room. And next, to introduce our second speaker, a distinguished speaker joining us via online, I would like to invite the Secretary General of Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, His Excellency Matthias Cormann. Hello, Secretary General. Greetings from Jakarta. It's such a pleasure to have you joining us in this session. If I understand you, it's evening over there? Okay, so we'll be speaking to you shortly, but just a quick background info on His Excellency Matthias Cormann is the 6th Secretary General of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, and starting his 5-year tenure from June 1st, 2021, and prior to his appointment to the OECD, His Excellency Matthias Cormann served as the Australian Minister for Finance, the leader of the government in the Australian Senate, and also federal senator representing the state of Western Australia. Again, sir, welcome. And
good to be here.
Oh, now I can hear you. Hello, good morning.
Yes,
from Jakarta.
I'm allowed to unmute myself. Thank you.
Such a pleasure to have you with us. It's an honor. But we are going to perhaps go back to our stage here first before we give opportunity to both of our speakers to perhaps give a brief overview on today's topic. So it'll be really interesting to hear what each of our speakers have to say, because their views and insight, of course, are going to be different, because both of our speakers are coming from different backgrounds. So I'd like to start with Governor Perry first. In terms of policy making, Governor, Bank Indonesia has navigated this past 2 years with adaptive measures, countermeasures, providing the space for a large fiscal and monetary expansion needed during the pandemic. Now that we are perhaps nearing the end of it, Governor, policy normalization, exit strategies are on the table. Mitigating risk from inflationary pressures and also debt accumulation needs to be addressed. And as I'd like to highlight, this was also pointed out by the Central Bank of Indonesia, requires a well-planned, well-calibrated, and well-communicated policy. So in your experience, Governor Perry, navigating throughout these past 2 years, how can emerging economies, how can Indonesia help in this regard, since we are assuming presidency of the G20 this year? And also highlight the importance of communicating, of the right communication to provide a forward guidance look in a way that would safeguard the growth momentum that we are experiencing right now. The floor is yours, Governor Perry.
Thank you, Kania, and my dear friend Matthias. Good to see you there, and of course, good morning everybody that joining us here and also in virtual. This is the topic that Indonesia putting forward great import, which is one of agenda that we have the global one. G20 must lead the way to recover together, recover stronger. This is the main theme that Indonesia presidency put forward. Minister Sri Mulyani and myself working very hard to ensure the global economic recovery is underway. Share, recover together, recover stronger. Kania, global economic recovery is underway, of course. 4.4% Bank Indonesia forecast this year. But along the way, there are risks. Risk of Omicron, risk of global supply chain, price energy, but most of all, from the macroeconomic and monetary policy, is normalization process. Some country already recovering, facing high inflation pressure. By doing that, advanced country, notably US, and soon will be European, starting to normalize their policy. But many and most of the emerging countries and developing countries, including Indonesia, is just starting to begin to nurture the economic recovery. This unsynchronized global economic recovery and unsynchronized monetary policy or normalization process of policy that we need to put together. Policy coordination. And by doing that, to recover together, recover stronger. How we do that? I will outline three most important aspects. One is from advanced country, second from emerging and developing countries, and third from the international organization, notably the IMF. Let me start with the first. For those advanced countries that starting normalize, we put forward the word well calibrated, well planned, well communicated. Every country facing, of course, domestic issue. How to support the economic recovery but maintaining the stability. US, for example, is planning to increase the Fed fund rate. Bank Indonesia forecasted 4 times, but market 5 times. This, the plan of normalization of monetary policy need to be well calibrated, well planned, well communicated. Monetary policy is forward looking, based on the forecast and then acting now. And I think this is that we see the Fed doing so. Starting last year, the Fed already communicating their plan of normalization from liquidity and now starting to increase, will increase, my apology, Fed fund rate. By well calibrated, well planned policy and well communicated, then the market can anticipate. We are working in the rational expectation market. And we are saying, no, even the Fed fund rate is not increasing yet. The US Treasury already rising from 1.3%, now it's about 1.8, 1.9%. So market actually already priced in, and the impact to the market already there, even though the Fed fund rate has not yet increased. This is important, so the impact of those planned policy normalization already priced in by the market, and then the emerging market, the developing market can take into account of those plans in our and respective monetary policy making. Those plan of normalization of policy, for example, Fed, and maybe later on European, already priced in the market, impacting US Treasury, and now how we have to calibrate from Indonesia, from emerging market to take into account in the policy. So first, advanced country in this normalization process, the word well calibrated, well planned, well communication is important so that the market and emerging country can take it into account to mitigate the global spillover. That's number one. Number two, how emerging market and developing country need to strengthen their resilience to withstand the impact of global spillover from those planned normalization process of the advanced countries. This is important. Based on our experience in Indonesia, the following 4 points need to take in place in emerging countries and developing to better withstand the global spillover, to strengthen the resilience from withstanding the external shock. First, foremost important thing is sound macroeconomic, which is fiscal, financial stability as well as monetary. This is important. The fundamental of policy making is sound macroeconomic and financial monetary policy. This is important. This is the issue. Because the normalization process of emerging market will be coming later. Indonesia, for example, we still, this year, still need to support growth. But starting next year, my dear Minister Sri Mulyani already planning that fiscal deficit will be coming back to 3%. So this is the basic of Indonesia son, which is fiscal deficit no more than 3%. Important. Financial System Stability Committee also ensuring the financial system stability. In many emerging countries, especially Indonesia, we work very hard under financial system stability to ensure that financial system stability are sound, the bank are strong, and starting to lending. The coordination is strong. Those sound macroeconomic and financial system stability, not to be there to ensure the basic fundamental of macroeconomic dimension, but also planning later on, probably starting next year, to start normalization. Need to be also well calibrated, well communicated, and well planned. Monetary policy, and I will answering some of your questions. Monetary policy in emerging country need also to be preemptive, forward-looking, as well as also ahead the curve. This is the meaning of well-calibrated, well-planned, and well-communicated. For many emerging countries, inflation may be already a pressure, but for many others, still not. Indonesia, for example, we are still working under low inflation. Output gap is still negative, inflation expectation well anchored, exchange rate pass-through is small, so our inflation this year is still within our target 3% plus minus 1. At the same time, we need to support economic growth with the fiscal coordination. This is the issue of monetary policy under the open economy. What we call it, the monetary policy trilemma. How we do that? Indonesia, we calibrate 3 instruments of monetary policy, which is exchange rate stability, liquidity, and interest rate policy. So please, if we talk about monetary policy from emerging country, including Indonesia, please do not talk only on the policy rate. There's the other 2 instruments, exchange rate policy and liquidity. How we manage the impossible trinity of monetary policy in open economy, monetary policy trilemma. In Indonesia case, we put on the exchange rate stability. Our exchange rate stability is still based on market mechanism. But in this global spillover turbulence, exchange rate movement may not be based on normal. There is shocks, And those turbulences, this is the exchange rate intervention needed, not to intervene on the fundamental, but to smooth out. This is what we do. We always ensure stability of the exchange rate based on market mechanism, based on the fundamental. And we do that. And coordinating with Minister Sri Mulyani, how to adjust the yield differential, government bond yield differential, not interest rate policy. Bond yield differential between US and Indonesia are still attractive for portfolio improvement. One instrument to address the impossible trinity of monetary policy is for exchange rate stability based on market mechanism, giving flexibility, as well as yield differential of government bond of Indonesia and US Treasury still attractive. Second instrument on the monetary policy, which is reduction of gradual liquidity. Over the past 2 years, Indonesia injects so much liquidity, quantitative easing so speak. I reckon about 5.6% GDP. One of the largest in the emerging economy, because we want to ensure the financial stability and monetary stability. Liquid asset at the bank now is about 35%. Prior to COVID, the maximum only 21%. So we start reduction of the liquidity, bit by bit. But ensuring the bank still able to extend loan and to purchase government bond. That's why we start increasing our reserve requirement. This year we already communicate to the bank. I think my fellows bank here knows. March, we will increase our reserve requirement by 1.5%, and then June 1%, and September 50 basis points. Well calibrated, well planned, well communicated. So the bank can adjust their portfolio management. But we want to ensure the liquidity at the bank more than enough to extend loan and to purchase government bond. Last instrument in the monetary policy, which is policy rate. This is where I have to say to the market over and over again that our policy rate 3.5% we will maintain until the early sign of fundamental inflation pressure. Interest rate policy always forward looking, preemptive, based on the forecast of inflation next year and following years. Our inflation this year still within target, 3%. Next year, probably there's pressure above the target. That's why we have to preempt, but not now. We need to calibrate later on, probably starting the third quarter and fourth quarter, but not now. And that's why I will answer the yield difference, interest rate difference, measure not the policy rate, but on the yield difference. This is very important. That's second aspect the emerging economy need to do. First, sound macroeconomic. Second, well calibrated, well planned, well coordinated monetary policy, which is I already outlined. The third, for some emerging countries, not Indonesia, the need also to have a capital flows management. This is being discussed over the past 4 days, 2 days in deputies, 2 days in minister, which is capital flows management, if needed for some emerging country, can be done. But it's not replacing the sound macroeconomic as well as monetary policy. For some countries that yet to liberalize the capital account, they need to plan. They need to also ensure that capital flows well managed so that do not compromise the external resilience. Fourth aspect, the emerging economy, which is the need for currency diversification. Most of the emerging countries use, mostly based on US dollar. This is where currency diversification of the use for promoting trade and investment need to be accelerated. This is what Asia experienced. We are doing a local currency settlement with the Japan, with the China, with the South Korea and other countries, including Thailand, Malaysia. So the diversification of the use currency to promote trade and investment needed. Kania, diversification. Don't put one egg in the basket. I think that's important.
Right.
So give me just 1 or 2 minutes. On the emerging economy and developing country, let me repeat again. The need sound macroeconomic. Second, well calibrated, well planned, well coordinated monetary policy. Capital flows management needed and currency depreciation. Last aspect, I know my time is running out, but bear with me. Well, as a host, I can have 1 or 2 minutes.
I'll give you all the time that you need.
Thank you. How the international organization can help manage the global economy to recover together, recover stronger. This is the role of the International Monetary Fund. Of course, Matthias will talking about OECD, and later on in the second session we will talking about financial stability from the Financial Supervisory Board. I will not intervene. They are the expert, I will talking about International Monetary Fund. Some of the things that IMF already doing and need to do more. One, from the IMF, of course, to strengthen the surveillance. You know, every year the IMF doing the monitoring, assessment of the country development, policy making. This what we call the surveillance. Surveillance of the country, also surveillance multilateral, the global. This is the need for the IMF to strengthen the multilateral surveillance so that can get advice to the G20 and countries how we can do the better, well calibrated, well planned, well communicated. And the fund already doing that. They are doing that, they're getting much better and better, I think is important. Multilateral surveillance. For emerging country, the IMF give advice and assessment what the nature, the impact, the size of global spillover impact to emerging economy. And this is that we are discussing with the IMF. How the global spillover will impact emerging countries so we, emerging country, can better prepare. This is important, advice from the IMF. So advice in terms of surveillance, bilateral, multilateral, and for emerging country, the nature, the impact, and how we better respond of global spillover normalization. I think this one aspect of the IMF. The second aspect is, of course, the role of the IMF in the lending facility, giving lending. Mostly, actually, for those that low-income countries. Matthias can share because OECD working this for Africa and so on, because those less developing country, they suffer most because the vaccination is very low, the limitation of the budget, the financing, and the external resilience. This is, I think, is important, giving facility. And we have to acknowledge the work of the IMF last year, increasing allocation of special drawing right. Last year is 650 billion US dollar amount, and asking those countries to allocate of some of the allocation for strengthening the resilience and sustainability trust fund. Now, already about 60 million worth of pledges from other emerging country. This trust fund is important. The money is still there, but the yield, the return, the profit, so to speak, from this trust fund can be used to help those less and developing countries. I think those aspect. One last thing, I will conclude, Kania, which is the importance of the IMF to accelerate the framework of integrated policy framework, which is emerging countries that many of them practice, and including Indonesia. Because in our policy making, we cannot resort only one policy. We need to have a number of policy. What we call it integrated policy framework. In Indonesia, I publish book on the central bank policy mix. The mix of policy of monetary, macroprudential, and other policy, capital flows management, and so on. Those emerging countries, I think, better to based on their policy making on integrated policy framework, because we are emerging. We cannot resort only one policy, but how to better mix of those policy into one integrated, coherent, also based on the condition of the country. With that, I conclude. Thank you, Kania.
Very well, thank you for that, Governor Perry. It was a brief overview. If I can highlight some of the key points that you've mentioned earlier, I think it is. I think we need to acknowledge the fact or recognize the fact that recovery process in between regions, in between countries, are not the same. And in order to do this, you are proposing that we go about the normalization process through a well-calibrated, well-planned, and well-communicated policies. And you also mentioned how important it is for advanced economies, especially, to communicate, which is the key for MEs to, of course, prepare for the global spillover so they can be in a better position, of course, to address the issues arising from these global spillover. And you also mentioned the need for MEs to strengthen their domestic economies and to build resilience, of course, and to better withstand the global spillover, perhaps impacted by advanced economies' process of recovery that are much faster than, for example, Indonesia right now. And you also mentioned about how to go about that. How to go about that, you mentioned that MEs particularly need to focus on a sound macroeconomic policy, on a well-calibrated, well-planned, and well-communicated monetary policy. You mentioned also specific case that the central bank has done over these last years, and also on managing capital flow risk and currency settlements, among others. So I'd like to follow up with some questions later on, but we have to move on to our second speaker that you already mentioned earlier. But thank you so much, Governor, again, to give us that overview. But let's move on now to Secretary General Corman. We would like to hear perhaps the longer perspective, Secretary General. If you can give us an overview on how to address the structural issues that has been impacted by the pandemic, such as how to push productivity to pre-pandemic full capacity for the corporate and also the financial sectors for, of course, a more sustained economic recovery and financial system stability. So what do you propose is the suitable policy to harmonize recovery and long-term productivity, and how would that differ and look like for individual countries and regions, Secretary General?
Well, thank you very much, and it's great to be here with my friend Perry. We had two very good and very productive days hosted by Finance Minister Sri Mulyani and Governor Perry. Thank you very much for the hospitality and a very positive, productive meeting over the last 2 days. Look, as has been said, the global recovery in the wake of the pandemic continues to progress, though growth momentum has slowed, and as has also been said, the recovery remains uneven across sectors and regions. In our latest OECD economic outlook, we expected global growth of 4.5% this year and 3.2% next year, which is closer to the rates seen prior to the pandemic. But, as again demonstrated by the major Omicron wave, new outbreaks and variants of the virus remains one of our biggest risks. And it's a statement of the obvious, but it does need to be said again and again anyway, and that is that we need to continue our all-out effort to get as many people as possible all around the world vaccinated and boosted against COVID as quickly as possible. And there's still a lot of work to be done on that front, in particular in developing economies. The Indonesian G20 presidency has therefore rightly placed the focus on recovering together, recovering stronger. Very, very important theme. And our goal should not be a return to the pre-pandemic status quo, but to embrace and to seize some of the opportunities for positive structural change offered by the pandemic. Though as the recovery progresses, policymakers do face a tough balancing act. The clear challenge is to fine-tune fiscal and monetary policy approaches to adapt them sensibly to the evolving health, economic, and fiscal circumstances, while avoiding errors. And indeed, well-planned, well-calibrated, well-communicated is exactly the approach that is needed here. On the fiscal side, we would say that it is a high time to more narrowly focus, support the sectors who genuinely still need that support, and on productivity enhancing future-focused investment, which will help boost growth. The redesign of fiscal support should be coupled with the right structural policies to avoid long-lasting scars. And governments must also continue to support reforms to address the economic and social consequences of things like population aging. While the pandemic, of course, has pushed up debt levels in most countries, which is something that we will need to turn our mind to. On the monetary policy side, recognizing that there's not a one-size-fits-all situation in countries around the world, central banks should act where demand is overheated or inflation expectations risk triggering a price-wage spiral. Where demand has yet to recover, the best central banks can do is to signal that they will act if inflationary pressures continue to rise. The pandemic has forced many workers through a long period of limited activity. It has affected economic sectors and firms differently, and it has weighed on future generations through disruptions in schooling. So looking forward, we face further reallocation challenges due to the seismic shifts in our economies and societies driven by digitalization and climate change. We need to let our economies adjust and, if necessary, remove obstacles to the reallocation of capital and labor to be able to fully seize the opportunities of the green and digital transformations. Open markets, a strong competitive framework, a system which rewards the most productive and innovative business ideas and which encourages investment in future growth and success will lead to quality job creation and the lifting of living standards. And in all countries, the private sector, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises, will be key to the jobs growth needed to boost the recovery. And supporting the digitalization of smaller and less productive firms will be key to ensuring sustained and inclusive growth after the pandemic. In recent years, we've been part of a massive digital transformation across the world, which was further accelerated by the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on consumer behaviors and business operations. Yet many economies have been struggling with sluggish productivity growth, declining business dynamism, increased market concentration, increasingly unequal opportunities and barriers to the full potential of innovation and the digital transformation to drive productivity growth. Differences in access to technology and intangible assets, such as managerial talent, research and development, or data, that have translated into rising productivity disparities across regions and firms, which can then translate into higher wage inequality. This does not only drag down aggregate productivity growth, but also contributes to overall income inequality. At the OECD, we aim to support policymakers in the digital transformation and to equip them with policy tools to make sure that it delivers on its promise to sustain growth, closing productivity, skills and income gaps, which had widened over the past decades. We really want everyone to have the best possible opportunity to participate and benefit from the recovery, from the digital transformation and from growth moving forward. Moreover, in reshaping policies towards medium and long-term objectives, it is important to ensure they avoid long-lasting scarring effects of the current pandemic on our economies and societies. Policymakers therefore need to ensure the right policies are in place to seize the opportunities that COVID has generated. For example, the increase in telework and the rise of online platforms, while also tackling some of the long-standing challenges that have been hindering the wide deployment and effective use of digital technologies. Now, some challenges that come to mind include poor infrastructure or inadequate infrastructure, low affordability, inaccessibility to digital services, inadequate skills for the digital era, competition policy issues, issues around cross-border free data flow with trust, cybersecurity issues, privacy issues, as well as policies that are not fit for purpose in the 21st century, like outdated international tax arrangements. That's something that through the G20 we are working to address. The OECD proposes a comprehensive policy approach based on the work of 14 of our committees to ensure that the digital transformation contributes to productivity growth and that it helps to close rather than enlarge productivity and income gaps, and that it mitigates the scarring effects of lost work and school time during the pandemic. So let me just focus on a few key elements. First, the need to improve lifelong learning. Raising productivity by investing in people is just as important as investing in capital. Skills, demographic and cultural diversity, as well as the right mix of workers and managers within business accounts for nearly 1/3 of the labor productivity gap between medium and top performing firms. Skills are key to the successful adoption of digital technologies. We must therefore place greater focus on lifelong learning programs for adults and digitalization of school systems at the heart of a resilient recovery, targeting these measures to those populations at greater risk of being left behind. For instance, in advanced economies, self-employed and gig economy workers are less likely to have access to training, while those working in the informal economy have no social safety net to fall back onto at all. Both of these problems at different ends of the scale are particularly acute in countries with a high incidence of informality. Second, we must enhance access to intangibles. A broad-based digital transformation relies on the ability to invest in complementary intangible assets such as software, data, research and development, and organizational know-how. Yet, financial frictions, underdeveloped equity markets, and insufficient public support can hamper investment in such assets. Now, intangible assets have characteristics that make their financing more difficult. They often require large and risky initial investments, while the difficulties in valuing such assets makes it difficult to use them as collateral. But the good news is that there is ample scope for governments to make policy choices to reduce the many obstacles that currently hamper the external financing of intangible investment. In the short term, we believe governments should ensure that stimulus packages are investment friendly when it comes to intangibles. For instance, by converting loan guarantees into equity-like capital injections for large firms or converting debt to grants for smaller firms. Direct government support for innovation can also play an important role, often complementary to tax incentives, in narrowing the financing gap in intangibles, especially for newer firms lacking alternative financing sources. The coordination at the international level for the development of common standards to better measure intangibles could also help to reduce information asymmetries. Third, we must adapt market framework conditions. Reversing the decline in business dynamism and the increase in market concentration, particularly in digital intensive industries, requires policies fit for the digital age, especially in the areas of taxation, competition law and enforcement, digital security, firms' entry and exit, and indeed e-government. Progress in these areas can secure a level playing field and market openness, promote business dynamism, and increase trust in the digital economy. Finally, we must work towards widening access to digital technologies. The universal connectivity is a necessity to ensure everybody has the chance of exploiting the opportunities digital technologies offer and to actively participate and benefit from what is on offer in modern societies. Fiscal incentives to encourage private investment in underserved areas, direct public investment where private investment is not commercially viable, and ensuring competition in telecommunication markets would improve and widen access to communication networks while supporting the digital transformation everywhere. Policies that foster wider digitalization will really pay off. New evidence produced by the OECD also shows that the productivity benefits of platform use for small and medium-sized enterprises and less productive firms are roughly twice as large as for large and more productive firms. And importantly, these productivity gains stem from higher value-added growth and not reduction in employment. There's also an enormous potential for the digital transformation to be a key enabler for reaching climate objectives, thanks to technologies such as smart meters, sensors, artificial intelligence, to name just but a few. According to some of our recent research, 60% of climate-related goods and services are protected by trademarks that are also related to digital technologies, which suggests that the twin green and digital transitions need to be tackled jointly by policymakers. And in this area, let me stress the need for more ambitious, effective, and globally better coordinated action, something that we've been discussing at the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors meeting over the last few days. The OECD is pleased to support the G20 by providing its evidence-based expertise across all of these different policy areas. Our work on taxation, of course, is one notable example. In 2021, after years of intense work and negotiations, members of our joint OECD G20 inclusive framework on base erosion and profit shifting reached a historical agreement, providing a global solution to make international tax arrangements fairer and work better in a digitalized, globalized world economy. We are proposing a similar approach to facilitate a globally more coherent, better coordinated, effective and fair approach to climate change. You can count on the OECD to continue to work with our partners all around the world, including and in particular with our friends in Indonesia, to do everything we can to seize the opportunities and better manage the risks of the recovery and the digital and green transformations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary General Corman, for that brief overview. I'd like to follow up with some questions as well later on, but let me just highlight some of the key points that was mentioned. I'd like to focus more on digitalization. I'm sorry for that. How digitalization is also providing an opportunity for all countries, especially to mitigate the scarring impact of the pandemic. And as was also mentioned by the Secretary General Corman, some key aspects that we need to focus on, especially when we talk about, paving the way with digital transformation, is the need to improve on long life learning, and also on investing of complementary tangible assets, and also on how to build intensive digital industries in a way that, at the end of the day, if we talk about long-term, is how universal connectivity can be achieved. And maybe these are some of the key points that we can discuss a bit more later on, but let's follow up on some questions. I think we have time for one or two before I hand over to the audience as well to give their views and also questions to our important panelists here. I'd like to follow up with some questions to Governor Perry. I'd like to discuss more on the negative spillover and how best to mitigate it for a way to recover together and aim, of course, for a future stronger growth. So going back to you, Governor, how do you think, how should policymakers and also business leaders in this way rethink policy normalization or exit strategy in a way that would support the recovery momentum? What can be done better? What should they focus on when we formulate together a policy normalization or exit strategy that can support the growth better in the future?
Well, Kania, when you are facing a big wave of storm, three things that we have to do: make your steps stronger. Second, of course, you doing more policy making, diet policy, and have more plan. I think there's three things. I already talked about the normalization process. I will talk now about more stronger economic growth. This is better, not now, but also to the future as you speak. Pandemic taught us about digitalization, but the death of digitalization need to be put into the question of productivity.
Yep.
Everything is about productivity. Then we ask, what is productivity all about? We talk productivity of capital, productivity of labor, productivity of technology change. Matthias already talked about productivity of labor, the need for continuous learning and digitalization, and one way to enlarge, to speed up, and also to give digital learning for most people. Indonesia, for example, we have Kartu Prakerja. For those youngsters that entering the job, the government under President Joko Widodo very strong reform commitment, giving those youngs to access of entrepreneurship through digitalization. So digital learning is very important for productivity of labor. Formal education, yes, but digital learning is much faster, must expand the people to access education. Capital. President Joko Widodo is very reformist on building infrastructure, toll road. But how we have to put those productivity of capital under the COVID and the pandemic beyond the pandemic. This is where the financing matter. Because at the end of the day, we talk about productive of capital, right? This is where the issue of sustainable finance, financial market deepening is very important, and we talk about under the G20. How can we work together not only about green economy but sustainable finance, which is also can be developed as well as enlarged, accelerated by digitalization. Among others, by digital financial inclusion, which providing financial services for those SME, the women, the youngs, through digitalization of financial inclusion access. Not only account-based, but through digitalization. This is where Indonesia, and under my governance, very strong and accelerating digital payment system. You are Indonesian standard, Bank Indonesia fast payment, and thanks to industry that joining us to digitalization of payment system to service digital financial inclusion, and by doing that, increasing the productivity of capital for those people. Sustainable finance. We talk about the green economy, how to structure, the financing of the infrastructure and so on through the green financing. This is what we're talking under sustainable finance. My dear friends, Minister Sri Mulyani working very hard for that, for not only green economy and also sustainable finance. All of those things talking about the productivity of capital through new way of sustainable finance and digitalization of payment system financial services, new way of productivity of labor through digital learning, giving more access to digital learning, and of course, I will talk about technological change. Technological change, this is the new civilization. Pandemic taught us about digitalization. Because for 2 years, our mobility being constrained.
Yeah.
But through digitalization, we can do economic transaction, financial transaction, where we are very reformist in our digitalization of economic and financial digitalization nationally. Bank Indonesia doing the digitalization of financial payment system with the industry to integrate of national digital economy and finance, working with industry, digital banking, fintech, e-commerce to build unicorn, dexacon. This is actually the productivity change, technological change.
Yeah.
Kania, in the past, we have to go to the bank.
Yeah.
Now we just sit here and then we can do the transaction everywhere. Bank Indonesia fast payment 24/7, real time, only maximum 2,500 rupiah, very cheap. Technological change can be advanced to cater the need, productivity of our economic growth, cater the need of the people through digitalization.
Yep.
So this what we're talking about the productivity. Of course, business climate, investment climate, our job labor law, and being inputted to increase productivity of capital, not only building infrastructure, but sustainable finance, also financial access to the SME, women and youth,
Right.
productivity of labor through digital learning,
Yeah.
as well as technological change through our reform in the digitalization of our national economic environment. This is the fundamental change to be recover stronger. Not only now, but also to the longer, higher path of our medium-term economic growth. Kania.
Yeah. To support a stronger and better growth in the future, Governor, we are ushering a new era of digitalization. Of course, maybe perhaps a little sooner than was expected before, ushered by the pandemic. You mentioned some of the key learnings, some of the key focus on reforming structural issues, such as on how to mitigate also the scarring impact of the pandemic, which is the lower productivity that we are experiencing. But taking all those lessons into account, Governor, can this be replicated for MEs, for all countries? What should countries take into consideration when they formulate the policy forward?
In the second session, we will talk about the increasing of collaboration and cross-border payment system. Under Financial Supervisory Board, that we also discussed over the past 4 days, that we have a roadmap for enlarging cooperation of the cross-border payment system. Each country, of course, need to digitalize their economic, their finance, and the payment system. And to enlarge the global economic benefit, then we have under FSB, Committee on the Payment System, we already have a roadmap for enlarging cross-border payment system from now to 2027. And Indonesia ready, because in May 2019, 10 months before COVID, I already released, Bank Indonesia released our blueprint of payment system digitalization toward 2025. So we ready, Kania, to join international cooperation on cross-border payment system.
Very well then. Indonesia is leading the way with forward-thinking policies, especially in cross-border transactions. I'd like to ask about that again, because that needs infrastructure, that needs investment. I'm going to talk to Secretary General Corman on his views on that. But before that, it's just a really fun question, Governor. We talk about, just one more question, Governor. Just a very fun question is this. When we talk about continuous learning, you mentioned you focused on the young people. What about the older population? As was mentioned by Secretary General Corman earlier, it said that skills is very, very essential in surviving in the digital era. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, demographic is changing. Indonesia, I think 55 is millennial. And my central bank, even 60, 65. So we go through digital learning to those millennial, but also teach them also to also help the middle or senior. I'm senior citizen, Kania, but I'm keen to learn digital digital learning.
So it's a continuous learning.
Yes, I think the continuous learning is very important. And this is where actually the benefit of technological of Indonesia and other countries to reach out to those older people like me, to understand more on the our digitalization in the economy. But the more thing that we have to do is not only from the bottom, but also a concerted effort from the national and across the world. This is digital learning is very important. Thank you, Kania.
Very well. Global coordinated. So moving on now to Secretary General Corman, before I have to also give the audience to ask their questions and also views. When Secretary General, so just to highlight some of the key points that has been mentioned earlier in your brief already, when we talk about structural reforms, I think has been the topic of much discussion even before the pandemic happened. So when we talk about digitalization as a way forward is now seen as more vital than it was before. I think we've also learned that the pandemic is highlighting the fact that the importance of digitalization is here as we survive distance interaction as a prerequisite during the pandemic. So take us through, in the context of taking advantage of civilization to support especially long-term productivity, what do decision makers need to take into account, and how not to leave anyone behind? Because when we talk about building the infrastructure, the resources and financing needed, I don't think all countries have access to it. What are your thoughts on this, Secretary General?
Well, I mean, this is the key challenge is to not leave anyone behind. I mean, innovation and technological progress, digitalization, was happening before the pandemic, but it's certainly true. The pandemic has massively accelerated the reach and the impact and the level of digital transformation. And it comes with many obvious benefits. I mean, the capacity to telework, to access telehealth and tele-education services, to sell products and services online, to buy products and services online. But it also comes with a whole series of new risks, challenges, and disruptions associated with it. And the first one is to ensure that we manage the digital transformation such from a policy sense to ensure it doesn't drive increased inequalities. I mean, and it goes through the whole spectrum. Inequality of access to the necessary infrastructure means different opportunities to participate and benefit from the digital transformation. So it's very important to be able to facilitate, and this is a public policy responsibility, to facilitate a level of universal, affordable access to the necessary infrastructure. And then, I mean, in a whole series of jobs, the digital transformation will be very disruptive potentially, and it's going to be important to ensure that workers can have the opportunity to participate in the future of work and the future approach to work in a digitalized world, and that they have the necessary reskilling and upskilling support in order for that to be able to happen. And then, you know, we do see that there are gaps for not just between regions of the world in terms of access to the necessary infrastructure and skills development, but also within economies between the larger businesses who have embraced digital transformation, invested in it, and some of the smaller, medium-sized businesses, which has impacts on the concentration of market power away from smaller and medium-sized businesses to the bigger businesses, which is something that we really have to be very mindful of. And so to the extent that we need to the extent that we can help small and medium-sized businesses keep up and not be left behind in terms of taking advantage of the opportunities of digital transformation, we should use policy levers in order to ensure that can happen. And then, of course, when you have a growing level of uptake in digital technologies when it comes to business, health, education, social interactions, I mean, the risk associated with cybersecurity, privacy, and so on become ever more bigger. And again, I mean, we've got to make sure that there is a level of equality of access to the necessary safeguard mechanisms to ensure that we can use, that all have the opportunity to use digital technologies in a way that is going to be safe. So there's a broad policy field which countries around the world really need to continue to turn their mind to, and fundamentally it goes to the issue that you raised. I mean, how can we ensure that we don't leave anyone behind, and that we provide the appropriate transitional supports to those segments of the population that are particularly disrupted by progress. We're not going to stop progress, as we shouldn't. Progress comes with many benefits, but we've got to make sure that from a public policy sense, we manage it the best way we can to ensure that it works for people, that it doesn't increase inequalities, but that it actually promotes a better equality of opportunity so that all have the right opportunity, the best possible opportunity to participate and benefit in the digital transformation.
Okay. Another question to you, Secretary General, would be just to, maybe you can give your insights or your views as well on the rate of adoption of digitalization. I want you to perhaps maybe give us some comments on what the Central Bank of Indonesia is actually initiating right now, which is a cross-border transaction built on a digital platform. And this has been possible because because of digitalization happening right now. So when we talk about making it more scalable on a global level for a more globalized system, what are your thoughts on this? How is the rate of adoption of digitalization right now is going perhaps to hamper the amount of effort that we are trying to make these structural changes?
Well, firstly, it's a very important initiative, and looking forward, I mean, Indonesia is a great trading nation, and digital trade is going to be increasingly important, and having the capacity of having cross-border data flows with trust is going to be very important to a well-functioning global market into the future, where countries around the world have the best possible opportunity to participate. So to have systems in place, to have the right, we will see the digital transformation continuing to accelerate. We will continue to see an increase in digital trade, but if we don't have the appropriate arrangements in place for cross-border data free flow with trust, then that can create new barriers to trade that can cause disruptions, that can cause some countries not to have the best possible opportunity to grow in that very important and growing part of the market. So I strongly support that initiative that the bank is taking, and I think it's going to be important all around the world for countries to engage in this topic.
Very well, thank you for that, Secretary General. Governor, would you like to comment on that, or should we go to the floor?
Go to the floor, please.
Let's go to the floor. Okay, so it's time for our audience who are present here in the Jakarta Convention Center right now to be able to ask their questions or maybe share their insights as well on today's topic. Is there any takers? Any takers? Go ahead. After that to Ibu Miranda, please. Yes? You can please stand up if it's okay.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Eddie. I'm from the Board of Supervisors Central Bank of Indonesia. I think the Governor, Pak Perry, the Secretary General, Pak Matias, your presentation, Pak Gubernur, is always very inspirational. And I think other central bank, especially for those in emerging economy, should listen to this session. I think it's very good. Let me a bit discuss about what is...
Can you focus, please? Because I cannot barely hear. Can you focus on the question, please? So
okay.
We can.
We see that the monetary policy mentioned by the Governor Perry should be, one is well calibrated, well planned, and well communicated. I think the important updated ongoing situation we need to take into account is the one is the Fed Governor Jay seems headed for policy normalization despite the new Omicron, the variant. Fed official pushback or the rapid interest rate hikes. The Federal Reserve should start raising the interest rate next month, according to some. And also with the inflation that is very hottest level in 2 generations, the Federal Reserve widely expected to see the cool the economy by raising its benchmark short-term interest rate. And although we need to search for the what is the inspiration and also the perception from the market, especially from the big players such as Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan discussing the United States inflation outlook and the number of the rate hikes in the Federal Reserve is likely to implement, but I'm very confident that the Governor, Pak Perry, and the Minister of Finance, Ibu Sri Mulyani, is on the right track for Indonesia, and we know that we are in the midst of surfing on the high waves, but we are already shown by the Governor and by the Minister of Finance with 2 integrated and collaborated policy, especially through Financial System Stability Committee. And we see that Indonesia is back to normal, as mentioned by Pak Kisrio.
Can you just go to the question, please?
Okay.
So the question is actually...
So the other participant can,
yeah,
can
that's the background, Pak Perry. And what is actually the longer term ideas to bring the economy goes to, to exit from this...
okay.
Yeah, I think that's the question.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Just one question to the Governor. Would you like to take this question first, or should we go to the next one?
Why don't we go to the next
Okay, let's go to the next one. We have Ibu Miranda right now.
Please
also,
do.
if we can, okay, Ibu Miranda. Please, your question or any insights or views that you would like to share in this occasion.
Thank you, Kania. Governor Perry, thank you very much. Matthias, thank you very much for very insightful presentations. Governor, I strongly seconded what you said. Well coordinated, well designed, well calibrated, well planned, well communicated. That's very important, and I agree with you. And I agree with that main focus on health, on digitalization, and of course on green energy. My question is, since the onset of the COVID-19 crisis, there are several challenges, and that challenges, the liquidity disturbances, capital outflows, and debt risk are already responded by countries in the world, especially in Indonesia. We've seen in a very visionary response.
Visionary response, okay.
Yes, but the pre-existing debt distresses, weak growth outlook in some areas, and increased, if I may say, some kind of geopolitical vulnerabilities pose more risk to global recovery. And that is something that I would like to know. How do you think and how vulnerable are the emerging developing economies to the current shocks compared to the global financial crisis shocks? Because the response, I think, is very good, but the risks are also multifaceted. The digital transformation risks are one of those that is still a big question. How will it impact the global financial stability? Thank you, Governor.
Thank you for that. I think we'll take two questions at once.
Yes.
Is that okay with you, Governor?
Okay.
Okay.
Well, the answer, I can just put it this way. This is the meaning, the real meaning, the deep meaning of recover together, recover stronger. Recover together meaning addressing the current issue that we can advance and emerging economy to recover together. How we do that? On the policy normalization from its fund need to well calibrated, well planned, well communicated, so emerging country can ready to withstand the shock. The emerging countries need also to well planned, well calibrated, well communicated, sound macroeconomic policy, preemptive monetary policy, capital flows management, currency depreciation. Beyond that, this is what the President Joko Widodo also making ensure cooperation and help and finance. Because not all emerging economy developing countries have access to vaccine. This is cooperation on the health. This is the issue of recover together. Advance, emerging country recover together. No one left behind. Normalization on monetary, fiscal, financial stability need to well calibrated, well planned, well communicated. Emerging economy also get ready to also sound policy, other policy, and cooperation also help assistance to those low-income countries that do not have vaccine for health. This is the meaning of recover together, including what Pak ID question about normalization of the Fed. Once again, the impact to the market is not about how much, how many Fed fund rate will increase. What the market understand that. Even before Fed fund rate increase, US Treasury already increase. So market already understand, price in that. This is why important, well calibrated, well communicated plan of Fed policy, and Fed doing great on that. I think this is so the emerging countries like Indonesia, we already take into account in our policy. The policy that I was explaining to. That's the meaning of recover together. on those macroeconomic, financial stability, as well as the health. Second, what the meaning of recover stronger? Productivity. That's what Matthias explained all along. Because at the end of the day, beyond the COVID, we want to return to longer term growth path. How we do that? Productivity is important. Why we need to increase productivity of capital, labor, technological change? How do that? We need to better investment climate, business climate, but beyond that, digitalization for finance, sustainable finance, digital learning, and also later on we'll discuss cross-border payment system to digitalize the economic and financial. That's the meaning of recover stronger. Productivity in the real sector, in the corporate, as well as the financial sector. This is actually what is discussed. Number 3, Indonesia cannot work alone. US cannot work alone. Everybody of G23 country cannot work alone. This is the theme the Indonesia presidency. Why? The word of recover together, recover stronger. More policy discussion, more understanding, more policy coordination, because this is togetherness. The power of we, this is G20 is all about. To get together, to recover together, to recover stronger. Recover together in the short term, recover stronger in the medium, longer term. Kania, back to you.
Very well. The power of we, Governor, yes? So we have one more opportunity for another question, just one more. I think at this point, I'll just like to invite the head of Fiscal Policy Agency, who's here with us as well, to share his views and also ask his question. Mr. Febrio Kancaribu. There you are. Is he here? Yes. Hello.
Thank you. Pak Gubernur, Matthias, thank you very much for such a invigorating discussion. We at the G20 Indonesian presidency, we are working for recovery together, recovery
Sorry,
stronger.
can you pull your mic closer to your,
Is
closer?
Is that better? Okay.
Yeah.
So we see the global politics is getting more complex. And coming out of this pandemic, we are looking at new normal. And we have to look at the new trends as a result of coming out of this pandemic, going to living with endemic. We identified at least 3 trends. The first one is clearly how do people are going to live in new normal. Clearly, during the pandemic time, we have relied a lot on digital technology. So that means going forward, we really need to adjust the way we live, and the world is going to adjust how they live. The second thing about this new normal is clearly how the world will need to have to be better prepared for the next future pandemics. So clearly the world need to coordinate. That's why in G20 we're talking about finance and health ministers trying to coordinate how to work together to anticipate future pandemics. So these are the new normal from after pandemic. The second one of the new trend we need to anticipate is that how the global value chain is actually also changing. We have seen how the supply disruption has happened as a result of the world responding to the pent-up demand, usually mostly from the developed economies. So looking at this opportunity, the business relocations from several places to new places are going to be a new trend. So that's why productivity is also a key. Pak Gubernur, I really like when you say that we have to make sure that ease of doing business is going to be in the forefront of our reform in emerging economies, especially like a country like Indonesia. Digitalization is going to be one of the big key as well for us to be able to increase our productivity and increase our attractiveness as a future potential destination for new emerging and high productivity investments. Now, the third trend I would like to share is that there is a risk of climate change, and not only that, there's opportunity that the whole world, including demographic-wise, the increase of awareness about this climate change risk. That is why one of the 3 presidency priorities set by our president, by Joko Widodo, number 1 is health, number 2 is digitalization, number 3, not to mention the list, is how we transition our energy. So this is the challenges that we are going to face, and also at the same time, these are going to be opportunities for countries, for emerging economies, but also for developed economies to work together to face all of these challenges, and also to work together how to improve and go in improving and also get to back potential GDP that we had before. The policy normalization would need to follow that. All of these new trends and how the world will react and actually adjust according to these new trends. So these are all new territory for us. Policy normalization is really going to be challenged in terms of how we react and adjust with these new trends. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Maybe perhaps I'd like for the Secretary General to comment on this. We are going into a new territory. It's a big if right now. I mean, going through the policy normalization, there are several trends that was mentioned earlier that we should anticipate, such as, you know, being prepared for a future pandemic, and also about climate change and all that, as the society also adjusts to a new way of living. So Secretary General Coleman, any views on these? On how to prepare better?
Yeah, well, thank you. And let me just say, I mean, that was a very good summary of what we need to look at moving forward. And indeed, as was said, I mean, the Indonesian presidency is precisely looking at these issues on how we can ensure better resilience of our health system moving forward, how we can optimize the digital transformation, how we can best manage the energy transition across all of these areas. International cooperation is, of course, going to be incredibly important, which the G20 is, one of the best platforms to facilitate broad international cooperation at a global level. Now, in terms of adjusting to the new normal, I mean, I think the world actually has done incredibly well. I mean, I was finance minister in Australia still when the pandemic first hit, and compared to what we feared might be the outlook, over the subsequent several years, the world recovered and adapted much more rapidly than was initially anticipated, and we will continue to adapt. I'm very confident on that. Of course, we need to plan on how we can be better prepared in the context of an external, potential future external shock like this one, in the context of a future pandemic, no question. And we need to continue to work on how we can really make every step a winner to the greatest extent possible. But I am quite optimistic. Now, you mentioned supply chains. A well-functioning global market, well-functioning a global rules-based trading system in good working order is going to be incredibly important to have a sustained recovery globally moving forward. But I would just say that the supply chains actually during the pandemic we're actually more resilient than perhaps given credit to. It's true that there was a very rapid recovery in demand, and the composition of demand changed, and in the context of some of the logistics constraints driven by the pandemic, production and distribution wasn't able to keep up as efficiently as we might have liked to the rapidly recovering demand with a different composition. But that also is adjusting and will adjust. And so having a well-functioning global market is going to be important for the recovery, for sustained recovery moving forward. And then, of course, climate change, yes. I mean, that is one of the big generational challenges for our generation now. 2050, around the world, an increasing number of countries is committed to carbon neutrality by mid-century, and to ensure that we have the most sensible pathway to get there effectively in a way that's fair, where countries around the world are making a fair and proportionate contribution to the overall effort, but while also making sure that we minimize trade distortions, trade tensions, carbon leakage risk as we try to move towards that carbon neutrality. That's going to be a very, very important area of international policy focus, and one that we very much look forward to working closely with the Indonesian presidency on. So, I mean, I'm optimistic about the future. This was a very significant shock, but I think the world has shown that we do have a capacity to adapt and move forward.
Very well, thank you for that, Secretary General Corman. I mean, when we talk about adapting, these are some of the ways we're adapting to the current situation right now. We are right now having a hybrid event, inviting speakers from all over the world joining us at this moment. So, Governor Perry, there are still a lot of uncertainties. There are still new challenges, new risks to be mitigated. So, going forward, what would be your key views on how to navigate? I mean, when we talk about the lesson learned throughout this past 2 years, I mean, the Central Bank of Indonesia has managed beautifully in managing and also formulating just the sort of adaptive policies that are needed just to, face the conditions that are and the challenges that are provided or not provided, but that are incurred by this current pandemic, Governor Perry. So what to expect then in Indonesia? Surprise is going to be there all along.
Well, Kania, that's life, right? Life is full of challenges. In every crisis, every pandemic, that we need to understand what the lesson. So we can be recover together, recover stronger. This is the theme that under President Joko Widodo on the finance track, which is Minister Sri Mulyani and myself is putting forward on the finance track. We have been living in 2 years, and we are strong enough. Our resilience, of course, there is a lot of still problem to solve, but we have been going through the biggest crisis that no one seen before. But we already survived. Let's together, the power of we to move forward. 3 important things to move forward, to get together under G20 leadership, coordination. 1, live healthy. This pandemic is all about. So we ask on the G20 that why don't we increase, enhance the power, we helping those countries that still not being able to vaccinate. This is actually cooperation in health. So healthy living is very important. Second, that we need to gather the power of we to get to address the current problem. How we need to normalize the current issue, as I was talking about, the power of normalization from advanced country, emerging country, and also the IOs, the IMF, others. So we can nurture the current normalization to recover together. This year, hopefully next year. Number 3, of course, preparing the future. What is the future that already starting over the past 2 years? Which is the future longer group, productivity, digitalization, and environment friendly. This is actually the theme that under President Joko Widodo put forward. That Minister Sri Mulyani and myself put forward in the finance track under G20. Let's coordinate better the power of we to, of course, healthy living together in health. Second, together in normalization, recover together, and together preparing for stronger growth, productivity, digitalization, and environment friendly. Thank you, Kania.
Very well. Thank you for that, Governor Perry. So in short, I think the recovery momentum need to be sustainable for a stronger future growth. For this, a global coordinated, as was highlighted again and again, plan needs to address some of the scarring effect of the pandemic by making the necessary structural reforms perhaps, and also formulating access strategies that are accurate and stable and well coordinated. And these are some of the issues that will be covered, and also these discussions will provide a strong foundation to be discussed later on during the G20 meetings, leaders meetings. So again, maybe a big round of applause for our distinguished speakers for this session. We have the Secretary General of OECD, His Excellency Matthias Cormann, and also Governor of Bank Indonesia, His Excellency Perry Warjio. And that's all the time that we have for now. Let's wrap things up. And thank you again also for the participants for joining us in this discussion as well as listening in. And of course, we're hoping that everyone is staying safe and healthy. I'm Kania Sutisnawinata, and I'll hand back the session to the MC.
Governor, please remain on the stage as we will have group photo session alongside with moderator and Secretary General of OECD. So we will take 2 shots of photo, if you may, Governor. We will take 2 shots of photo between Governor of Bank Indonesia, Secretary General of OECD that will join us virtually, and our moderator, Ms. Kania. All right. On the count of 3. Okay, on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. All right, once again, 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much, Governor Perry, Secretary General of OECD, and Ms. Kania Sutisnawinata. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will continue our agenda with second session of the discussion. The discussion will be about global financial stability and its new challenges. We will discuss the detail of the measure to improve resilience against potential cross-border spillovers and structural changes. This session will be moderated by Senior Deputy Governor of Banca D'Italia. Before we start, allow me to briefly introduce Mr. Luigi Federico Signorini. He is currently the Senior Deputy Governor of Banca D'Italia since April 23rd, 2021, he is also the president of the Insurance Supervisory Authority, and prior to his current post, he was the deputy governor of Banca d'Italia from 2013. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Mr. Luigi Federico Signorini.
Thank you and good morning to you all. I think I will be joined on stage by my colleague Yuda Agung. Is he anywhere near? Oh, here you are. So, a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, the title, and welcome Yuda. The title of our session today is Global Financial Stability and its New Challenges. Actually, when you talk of new challenges, there's some that are not entirely new in the sense that today they are legacy challenges, something that we have been confronting for a while but are not entirely resolved. Do you hear me, or do I need the microphone? Is that fine? Okay, thank you very much. So let me start with the one legacy problem that we have started to address over the last year, namely vulnerability in what was once called the shadow banking system, and then it was translated a non-bank financial institution system, and now goes by the name of market finance, which sounds much less threatening. But whatever the name, its size, its footprints in financial markets, its interconnectedness have grown immensely over the past few years. And we, and when I mean, us as for instance, the chair of the previous chair of the G20, but even before, we had been pressing this issue very strongly for years, seeing the potential, of course, the potential benefits of the market-based finance, but also the risk implied in their structure, in their operating modes. And I think that the events of a couple of years ago, the events of March 2020, highlighted some of those risks. The risk materialized. And this is when I think the FSB and other international bodies, standard-setting bodies, began tackling the issue rather seriously. It is now the issue of, and the NBFIs is now among the G20 priorities, among at the center of the FSB work plan. Under the Italian presidency, the G20 endorsed an agreement on a package that provides jurisdictions with a framework for assessing and addressing the vulnerabilities in the money market fund sector, with an agreed set of policy. Frankly, we would have preferred to go further in the direction of agreed international standards for regulation. That this proved not to be possible, but at least we have now a framework, a kind of menu of choices that jurisdiction may choose from to implement policies, regulation, supervisory action in this area. Substantial progress is still needed in other sides, in other parts of the non-bank financial institution world. And that's, I think, one thing that our panelists will cover. But two things, when we look forward to the future, as I think Governor Perry said a minute ago, the usual twin challenges, the twin transition that comes to mind, digital transition and climate transition. And I think digital transition has been covered a lot during the previous panel. Technological innovation in finance has many promises, but also entails risks. There's one thing I would like to mention, but just to mention once in this context, which is financial inclusion. The potential for heightened financial inclusion provided by technological advances is enormous, especially in certain countries where the population that did not have access to financial services now does have some access through increased technology and improved technology. But at the same time, there is also the risk of exclusion for those who are not in a position, do not have the skills to use technology to their best interest. But this has been covered very, very extensively during the previous session. So I think that speakers in this session may want to look at other issues of financial risks stemming from technology advances. And in this context, it's difficult not to utter the C word, crypto. You know that there is a lot of discussion going on about an entire zoo of animals, from crypto assets to stable coins, including even central bank digital currency, which is, I think, a different animal altogether. I think that our speakers will talk about that. One thing that I would like to say to stimulate that observation is that my impression, at least, is that there is a much need for clarity in this context. As I said, there is a zoo of animals, but those animals are different in the sense of their economic nature, technological features, and the type of risks that may pose to financial stability. To me, at least, the most important distinction is between crypto assets that are somebody's assets, but also somebody else's liabilities, and those that are somebody's assets but nobody's liabilities. This is a distinction that is sometimes lost, overlooked, but it's extremely important. Not the only important one, but perhaps the most important one. Now, as crypto assets rarely stop at borders, ideally we would like to have a kind of global framework, a global harmonized regulation for them. This is tricky for many reasons, but at least I think that it is important that we make clarity on conceptual distinctions, that we when we take decisions about regulatory and supervisory issues, at least we speak the same language, and we use very well-defined terms so that we can understand each other, and in this way contribute to avoiding regulatory arbitrage and other difficulties that come from concepts that are not clearly defined. And of course, climate transition is the other thing, and I think also on this our interlocutors today will spend some time. And again, there is, in this case as well, I think that when we talk about climate transition in the context of financial stability, I think it's essential to make a distinction. There are two things. One thing is steering our economies, our societies to net zero. And the other things in our context is ensuring that financial institutions manage climate risks thoroughly and efficiently. Both, of course, are important. Both are connected, but they're different. And there are different tools to pursue those different goals. Climate policy and energy transition as a general goal of society, for economies and societies, they call for choices about mainly taxation, subsidies perhaps, and regulation. When we talk of climate change as a risk for finance and financial institutions more specifically, then the issue is the tool of choice are regulatory choices, supervisory steps, supervisory tools like stress testing, risk management standards, etc., etc. As I said, both are important, they're connected, but we should keep the conceptual distinction between the two things. Sometimes I feel that there is the temptation to use supervisory or regulatory prudential tools as that's incentive, so to speak. That is not the function. And I think that it is important to make progress on both fronts. It is important to keep the two things as conceptually clear as possible. Now, I think that's enough for introduction. I think these three things, non-bank financial regulation, digital transition, and climate transition, are some of the most important issues that I'm sure our speakers will talk about. Our panel is a very distinguished panel with although there has been, as many of you may know, there has been changes in the composition of the panel. We are lucky that in the end we ended up with a panel that is really very interesting for us. I think people that will be very interesting to listen to. And the first person I would like to invite to our virtual debate is Philip Lowe, the Governor of the Reserve Bank of Australia. This is the Australian Central Bank. I hope he's on the line. Is he? No?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thank you very much. As I said, Governor Lowe has been the Governor of the Reserve Bank of Australia for 5 or more years. And besides the various responsibilities that he has in his country connected to his position as the head of a central bank, he is of course a member of the Financial Stability Board, and he is the current chair of the CGFS, the Committee of on the Global Financial System of the Bank for International Settlements. He's a very well-known economist, and also he has been the author of many papers and writings on the linkages between monetary policy and financial stability. So, Governor Lowe, Philip, if I may, the floor, or rather the screen, is yours.
Thank you very much, Luigi, and good morning, everybody. I'd like to thank Banca Indonesia, and particularly my good friend Governor Perry, for the opportunity to participate. I'm really sorry I can't be in the room with you. Rather, I'm still here in Sydney, and I hope to be in Indonesia later in the year for the next G20 meeting. As others have already said, this symposium addresses a really important issue. How do we recover together? And then how do we make sure that the momentum that we currently see in the global economy is maintained once we're through the pandemic? Both Matthias and Perry have spoken very well about the role of productivity reforms. I'd like to mainly talk about the role that the financial sector has to play in this important mission of recovering together and sustaining the recovery, and I'll touch on some financial stability issues as I do that. I want to focus my remarks on 4 issues that or 4 ways that the financial sector can support the recovery. The first is to be an absorber of economic shocks, not an amplifier of shocks. The second is to be a source of finance for new productive investment, including the transition to a green economy. And the third is the role that productivity improvements within the financial sector itself can play in promoting growth, including through the development of new forms of money and new forms of payment. And the final thing that I want to talk about is the role that finance can play in improving inclusion and reducing inequality in our societies. So I plan to say a few words about each of those 4 issues. First, if we are to recover together, then we need the global financial sector to be an absorber of shocks. Here, I think it's useful to compare the 2008 global financial crisis with the pandemic. In the financial crisis, the global financial sector amplified the shocks and made things worse, and the result was severe economic pain in most of our countries. In the pandemic, the reverse has been the case. The financial sector has acted as a shock absorber. Banks gave repayment holidays to borrowers, which helped. They extended repayment terms and they made credit available at low interest rates to borrowers who needed it. As a result, the banks lessened the shock, they helped limit damage to our economies, and it's one of the reasons that many of our economies have been quite resilient. I think banks were able to play this role because of the reforms to capital and liquidity over the previous decade. The G20, the FSB, and the standard-setting bodies all played important roles in the development of these reforms. I think this is a really good example of what can be achieved when we work together. In this case, by working together, we developed a safer global financial system. Looking forward, we can't be sure where the next shock's going to come from. I think we can be sure there will be another shock. We've already talked this morning about the prospect of rising interest rates around the world. This increase in interest rates is occurring in an environment where debt levels are much higher than they were before, particularly in the advanced economies. And it's also occurring after a very big run-up in asset prices, including the cost of housing in many countries. So rising interest rates on high debt with high asset prices. You can see the fault lines here. I think it's also relevant that the increase in interest rates is not likely to be synchronised across countries, given there are very different inflation dynamics in our countries, and Perry talked about this earlier. The US and many European countries have quite high inflation at the moment. But here in Asia, inflation is not particularly high. In Australia, our core measure of inflation has only reached the midpoint of our target range for the first time in 7 years. And in much of Asia, inflation is not particularly high. I think we know from previous experience that when countries are on different paths in terms of interest rates, stresses do emerge in the global financial system. So I think it's quite possible, in fact probable, that there'll be stress points over the next couple of years. In this environment, we need to make sure that the post-crisis financial reforms are maintained, and where they still haven't been fully implemented, that they are implemented. Building this resilience is going to be really important over the next few years. The second issue I wanted to talk about was the role of the financial sector in providing finance for productive investment, including for the transition to the green economy. If we are to have a durable recovery from the pandemic, we need businesses and governments to invest. If they don't invest, the recovery is only going to be lacklustre once the snapback from the pandemic is over. And if they don't invest, real interest rates will stay low, savers are going to get low returns, real incomes will not grow very much, and we'll all pay the price for that. So the expansion of our productive capital stock is crucial to our collective prosperity. Some of this expansion can be financed from firms' internal resources, but much of it needs to come from external resources, including from banks and from the bond and the equity markets. One area that will need major investment is the restructuring of our energy systems, including the way we produce and use energy, the way we store energy, and the way our energy distribution networks are configured. The financial sector is key to this investment. I think we all know people in this area need to make decisions under considerable uncertainty. It's really hard to know exactly how our climate's going to evolve. It's hard to know what new technologies will emerge, and it's probably hard to know what the future policy environment will be as well. Given this uncertainty, participants in financial markets need the information now to be able to assess and price climate risks and opportunities so that they can fund the investments that are needed for the transition to a lower emissions economy. The FSB and the standard setting bodies are rightly setting supervisory expectations for the measurement and management of financial risk from climate change. Regulators, including here in Australia, are conducting climate stress tests to help measure the exposures in the financial system. And there are many international efforts underway to improve the quality, consistency, and breadth of climate risk disclosures. Some countries are also developing green finance taxonomies to define what is sustainable and to direct investment towards these activities. It's important that these taxonomies don't just focus on activities that have an immediate benefit, but also include activities that are necessary to ensure the transition to net zero over time. So Australia very much supports Indonesia in placing the financing of this transition to a green economy on the G20 agenda. I think if we don't get this right, it'll be a source of future instability in our financial systems and our economies. The third issue I wanted to talk about is the role of finance as a source of innovation itself, and that innovation can help improve our collective living standards. Because we all know finance is in many ways at the forefront of many of the new technologies that have been developed over the past decade. Think artificial intelligence, big data analytics, and distributed ledger technologies. These changes in technology are also reshaping how we think about money. I think if you look back through the broad sweep of history, it's pretty clear that what societies use as money is shaped by technology. Some time back in history, people used silver and gold coins for money. Then they used paper instruments. Then they used paper banknotes. In Australia, we use pieces of plastic polymer banknotes with sophisticated holograms on them. And in many countries, the main form of money now is electronic bank deposits that can be moved over the internet almost instantaneously. So as technology changes, so does what we use as money change. We can't be sure what the next innovation in money will be, but I think there's a fair chance that it will be a form of digital token that sits in a digital wallet or a digital device. If that's what happens, it offers the potential for lower costs and for more flexible payments for people, and I think it'll be more inclusive. It's hard to know where this is going to end, but I think there are significant opportunities here. If money does evolve along these lines, it needs to be supported by a really strong regulatory regime. One option that's on the table is for these digital tokens to be backed by central banks, just as central banks today back the banknotes. So you could think of this as a form of central bank digital currency that's available for retail use. Another possible option is that the tokens are not backed by central banks, but are backed by private entities. And this would be some form of stable coin against our national currencies. If this is what happens, then I think we really need to give close attention to the design and the collateral banking of this privately issued money. I say this because history is littered with examples where private money worked really well for a time, but then something happened, confidence is damaged, and it all ends in disaster and financial crisis that hurts people. And that's the reason, I think, why our currencies today are backed by the state and that we have state-sponsored deposit insurance. So the collateral underpinning of this and the regulatory regime is really important. Things that seem like they're working well for a while, if they're not backed adequately, can turn out to be very bad for the society if there's a damage to the confidence. So the challenge here for us all is to develop a regulatory regime that promotes innovation, but that can also deal with the stability issues that can arise with new forms of money, particularly stable coins. And the central banks, the FSB, and the G20 are all working on this, and it's a really important part of our agenda for the future. Beyond the notion of money, there are many other opportunities for innovation and productivity improvements in the financial sector to lower costs and to develop new products that help people. One of the reasons that financial intermediation can be expensive now, and it can often be limited to borrowers who already have well-established connections, is that there are often acute information asymmetries, which the lenders can't easily overcome. This is particularly an issue for the micro and small businesses that are an important source of dynamism in our economies. Some of the new technologies can lessen these information asymmetries by increasing the available sources of data and making it easier to process that data, easier to collect the data and to monitor the loans. As a result, in many countries now, we're seeing new lenders emerging who are using this new information technology. And these new lenders are lowering costs and making finance easier to get for micro and small businesses. In some cases, it's the market-based financing that Luigi talked about. So I think this is an exciting area too. We need to make sure that the regulatory arrangements are supporting stability in this area, but that they also continue to encourage the innovation that's possible by this new financial technology. The last thing that I wanted to talk about was the role in finance in promoting inclusion and reducing inequality. And this is one area I think we all have a lot to learn from Indonesia on, particularly its financial inclusion agenda. There's a lot of innovation occurring here, including the development of fast payment systems, the increasing use of open APIs, and the adoption of QR codes, which lower payments costs for micro businesses. I think more broadly, the hope is that improvements in information technology and data processing will help small businesses that haven't been well served by the financial institutions. It'll help overcome these information asymmetries, and given those asymmetries are most acute for micro and small businesses, they're the ones that could potentially benefit most. One other area where there is considerable scope for improvement that would enhance inclusion is cross-border payments, and we spoke about that in the first session. For many people, cross-border payments are still too costly, they're too slow, and they're too inconvenient. And in Australia, we see firsthand how this disadvantages people who are less well off. It's a really major issue in the South Pacific, where the cost of remittances is very high. Poorer people pay these costs to their disadvantage and to the disadvantage of their communities. It's a really important issue that we address. The Reserve Bank of Australia and the Reserve Bank of New Zealand are working with the South Pacific central banks to try and address this, but it's proving hard to make progress. This means that it's really important to keep the focus on the G20's roadmap on cross-border payments. This is a project with a lot of layers and it's going to take time to pay off. And we really welcome the Indonesian presidency's support for this work. It's particularly important for people who are less well off. It's certainly possible that a central bank digital currency will help here. So too might the various initiatives that are underway to improve payments infrastructure, including ideas to link up fast payment systems, especially in this part of the world. So this is an area that's important that the central bank community and the private sector keep working on. So in conclusion, I want to thank again the Indonesian presidency for putting this item on the agenda. It's important that we recover together, and that once we are past the economic snapback from COVID, that the economic recovery can be sustained. The financial sector can help us do this. It can do this by maintaining buffers against future problems. It can do it by financing business investment, including the transition to the green economy. And it can do that by being innovative and by being supported by a regulatory regime that promotes this innovation, but also protects people and that can address the financial stability issues that can come with new forms of money. And finally, the financial sector can help by bringing more people into the system in a way that they can afford and that suits them and helps improve their own situation. So thank you, and I look forward to a subsequent discussion.
Thank you very much, Governor Lowe, for your various very insightful comments. And I would like to emphasize a couple of the things that you mentioned. First, on the issue of new technology and finance, I think what you said showed in a way that when regulators and supervisors are always confronted with the same old problems, liquidity transformation, leverage, asymmetrical information. Only they take different shapes, different forms with different technologies. And we as regulators need to, on the one hand, keep an open mind towards the new possibilities, the productivity incentive, the welfare incentive, the welfare increasing promises that the technology has, but at the same time an open eye on the new forms that these old risks may take for us to remain busy with them. Second thing that I would like to emphasize on what you said is talking about climate transition. You mentioned one point that I think is important and cross-cutting whenever one talks about climate change, which is the issue of taxonomies, of data, of good data. That is a sore point actually in the present moment, because it's good data and good taxonomies are a difficult, challenging tasks, and they are something that I think it is important for us to promote, to work towards. And I think that the G20 initiative is in favor of data gaps, of filling data gaps, is extremely important in this respect. And I cannot help saying that I had noticed that the very fine piece of art hanging behind you, and especially when you talked about the climate transition, the environment transition, it looked like that kind of art in a way is an inspiration for finding ways to steer our economies and our financial systems towards a a good harmony with the environment we all live in. So thank you very much. And the next speaker is Dietrich Domanski, who is the Secretary General of the FSB and has been in this position since January 2018, has been before working for a long time at the FSB. He worked at the Bundesbank and the International Monetary Fund. Dietrich, over to you.
Thank you very much, Federico, and thanks to the Indonesian presidency for the invitation to join this session. Looking beyond the pandemic, I'd like to discuss the work that the FSB is doing to address vulnerabilities in the financial system, which are more structural in nature. And this includes developments that you, Federico, and Phil already touched upon: non-bank financial intermediation, or NBFI, financial innovation, and climate change. So to put these issues into context, it is useful to reflect briefly on the lessons that we have learned during the pandemic as the first major test of the financial system since the great financial crisis of 2008. So broadly, this is a good news story. The core of the financial system, including banks and market infrastructures, have proved resilient. And this, combined with the swift and effective measures taken by governments and central banks, ensured that access to credit was not impaired for most jurisdictions. A factor which has helped many households and firms, not least many SMEs, to navigate the financial challenges posed by COVID-19. The ability of the banking system and the core of the global financial system more generally to absorb such a large economic shock reflects a concerted multilateral effort to address vulnerabilities highlighted by the global financial crisis. And this effort was initiated by the G20 and coordinated by the FSB. But the financial market turmoil in March 2020 also exposed important vulnerabilities within the NBFI sector. Following a decade of rapid growth, NBFI now accounts for almost half of all global financial assets. And this growth means that smooth financial intermediation is increasingly dependent on the liquidity of markets. In March 2020, liquidity was stressed when market participants moved to sell assets in the so-called dash for cash. Large liquidity imbalances occurred as dealers in financial markets struggled to meet massive spikes in demand for liquidity. And these liquidity imbalances were amplified by margin calls, the use of leverage, and the liquidity transformation being undertaken by certain investment vehicles. This ultimately led to dysfunction in some funding markets and created the need for extraordinary central bank interventions. The FSB is currently working to address these vulnerabilities. This includes work on liquidity risk and its management in open-ended funds and money market funds, the structure and drivers of liquidity in core bond markets during stress, margining practices, fragilities in US dollar cross-border funding, and their interaction with vulnerabilities in the emerging markets. And last but not least, developing and assessing policies to address systemic risk in NBFI. Now, some people have referred to NBFI as the spare tire of the financial system, as it can act as an alternative source of funding when bank balance sheets are constrained. I think this seems right insofar as NBFI adds to the diversity of funding sources for the real economy, thereby supporting strong recovery. What the metaphor misses is that the financial system as a whole has become increasingly interconnected, including links between NBFI and banks. So perhaps one needs to add that it's good to have a spare tire, but that all the critical parts of a vehicle need to be robust for it to drive safely. In other words, financial stability requires to take a holistic view at the financial system. And this is exactly what the FSB is doing through its broad and diverse membership. The shift to NBFI is not the only change underway within the financial system. Digitalization is accelerating, has already been mentioned, driven in part by social distancing and work from home requirements during the pandemic. At the same time, our economies are adapting to the reality of climate change and the need to meet the targets of the Paris Climate Accord. These changes offer the potential for a more sustainable and efficient economy with considerable benefits for citizens worldwide. But change can also be disruptive and may create new financial vulnerabilities. At a general level, the challenge raised by digital innovation in finance is similar to those of NBFI that I just talked about. We need to understand the implications of changes in intermediation structures for financial stability and address any vulnerabilities. The key difference with digitalization is that important innovation is happening outside the traditional financial system, often supplied by non-financial entities such as big techs, traded on unregulated platforms and transferred on ordinary computer networks globally. Crypto assets, the C word that Federico referred to, are a case in point. The FSB has been monitoring crypto asset development since 2018, and our recently published report on the risks to financial stability from crypto assets articulates the need for proactive policy in this area. The report covers unbacked crypto assets, so-called stablecoins, and what has become known as decentralized finance. It concludes that these markets, which are evolving rapidly, could reach a point where they represent a threat to global financial stability due to their scale, structural vulnerabilities, and increasing interconnectedness with the financial system. To be sure, digital innovation offers important opportunities for more efficient and inclusive finance. And the use of new technology is therefore one important element of the ongoing work to enhance cross-border payments. The aim of this work is to bring about cheaper, faster, and more transparent and inclusive cross-border payment services, including for remittances, for the benefit of all citizens and businesses worldwide. The prominence given to technology in the payments roadmap that the FSB developed for the G20 clearly illustrates that the ultimate objective of the FSB's work is not to stifle innovation and new ideas. It is to create the conditions for safe innovation that benefits people and society and preserves the global public good of financial stability. Addressing the financial risk from climate change through the FSB's climate roadmap is one of our priority areas of work. Our roadmap seeks to support international coordination by bringing together the work of international organizations and national authorities and standard-setting bodies on the various initiatives to address climate-related financial risks. This year, we will work, our work will gather pace on all four blocks of our roadmap, which is disclosures, data, surveillance, and regulatory and supervisory policies. We are supporting the work of the recently established International Sustainability Standards Board, ISSB, to develop a much-needed global baseline standard for climate-related financial disclosures. What gets measured can get managed, so it is imperative that we have high-quality, consistent disclosures about institutions' sustainability-related risks. The FSB has also identified priority areas where data gaps need to be addressed in a consistent manner. And this includes data on exposures of financial institutions and forward-looking metrics of climate risk. We will be working jointly with a network for greening the financial system on the use of effective scenario analysis and the financial metrics needed for this analysis. By the end of this year, we will publish a report synthesizing outputs of scenario analysis done by jurisdictions so far. And finally, we are working on regulatory and supervisory practices and tools for addressing the financial system risks associated with climate change. Now, let me conclude by emphasizing how important it is to address financial stability risks from these structural changes at the current juncture. Exiting the pandemic and winding down extraordinary policy support measures in ways that do not disrupt the recovery does require a resilient financial system. In turn, harnessing the opportunities associated with more diverse financial intermediation through technological innovation in finance and through adjustment to climate change can be a major driver of recovering stronger, recovering together. Given the G20's ambition for a robust, equitable, and sustainable economic recovery, safeguarding international financial stability is as important as ever. And I'm very much looking forward to working with our membership and the G20 presidency as we pursue this goal. Thank you very much, and Federico, back to you.
Thank you, Dietrich, and thank you for this very comprehensive overview of the main things that are on the menu of the FSB at this moment. I think that you correctly emphasized the fact that the good work done in the previous years concerning the some parts of the financial system, especially the banking part, have meant that the banking system confronted the new crisis, the COVID crisis, in a much stronger position than before. And that, as many have said in those circumstances, the banking system has been part of the solution, not part of the problem at the moment. But this only underlines the need for giving attention to the rest of the financial system, as you said, and as Governor Lowe said before, not because we want to stifle innovation, because we recognize that innovation is as beneficial for productivity and also for inclusion in the financial system as in other parts of the economy, but to be alert to the issues of stability, of financial stability risks that it entails. And I think that it is extremely important that we do this in a global setting, because finance has hardly known borders for as long as it existed, but it is even more borderless now that it has become digital. So it is acting together in these circumstances really is a precondition for acting in a stronger way. So, and by the way, thank you very much for joining us in what is, I think, what are the very early hours of the morning where you are, Dietrich. Thank you very much for that. Now our third speaker is Yuda Agung, who is the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Indonesia since, I think, the beginning of the year. So welcome to this panel, and the floor is yours for your consideration on the challenges that are confronting us. Yuda, please.
Thank you, Federico. Let me talk from the emerging market perspective in this context. If we're talking about the global financial stability race and the new challenges, the number one and the immediate risk, of course, the tightened global financial condition, as a result of the normalization in the advanced countries. But fortunately, emerging market economies now in better position. If you look at the current account of the big five emerging market is now in the better position. Indonesia, Brazil, and India, South Africa, and so on. I think we are now, the current account deficit is relatively low compared with a taper tantrum episode in 2013, where Indonesia is coined as a fragile five together with Brazil, India, South Africa, and Turkey. So this is, I think, the communication, the calibration has been, it's been, compared with the 2013, is now in the discussion in the global, G20 and IMF and so on. The communication is now they are doing well, and the second challenge that I would like to raise is for the emerging economy, as I think also in advanced countries to some extent, is the rise of a feedback loop from scaring effect in the corporate sector as well as in the household sector to the bank balance sheet. The feedback loop of the two sectors, I think we have to address carefully. If you look at the granular data on the corporate sectors, in general, there is some improvement recently. Repayment capacity, the profitability, and so on, but still below the pre-pandemic level. So, and there are some, differential impact of the COVID to the different sector of the firm, of the corporate sectors. So, domestic-oriented corporate sectors is much more impacted by the COVID than, commodity-based or manufacturer-based, which more oriented to the export sectors. So I think this is the second challenge that we have to put attention. The third challenge, I think you already raised, is the excessive risk-taking behavior by household, triggered by the excess saving during the COVID, together with low interest rate and the availability of the high return, high yield instrument like crypto. I think this is also a big challenge for us, I think, globally. And for Indonesia, for example, the number of investors in the crypto assets already above 6 million, and most of them are the young population. They are more technological aware and so on. So digital things. But the experience as an investor, I think we need to more provide literation on the risk and return investment. So the number 4 is, I agree with that, how to promote the financial inclusion. As we know that the COVID badly impact on this segment, small medium enterprises, unskilled labor, lower segment of the society. So the financial inclusion is crucial to narrow down the gap between the higher income and the lower income, the higher firm, the big firm and smaller firm. The fifth issue, I think we already agree that how to finance the sustainable economy, the green economy. I think, you know, in the midst of the situation where the fiscal policy is quite limited now because they have to consolidate their fiscal position, then of course the role of private sector is crucial, is important. That's why, you know, we have to work together in the G20, how to encourage private sectors to finance this, the green economy, you know, banks and as well as in the financial sectors. So the question is how we address the 5 risks that I mentioned before. First, in terms of financial policy, I think the unwinding financial policy that we already taken during the COVID should be carefully calibrated, you know, and you know that's why we in Indonesia already extend, you know, the restructuring program by OJK to, you know, we extend to 2023 March. And secondly, on the macroprudential policy, we should focus on the mitigation of the risk of feedback loop between the corporate sectors and the banking sectors. That's why we have to look at more granular sectoral approach to support the sectors that badly affected by the COVID, you know, like accommodation in the tourism sectors, you know, transportation sector, and so on. So this is the beauty of the macroprudential policy, where we can address sectorally, not you know, a broad-based type of policy. And in Indonesia, we recently just issue a regulation or incentive for banks that who lends, you know, certain sectors that we already defined. You know, we provide incentive for the banks to lend certain sectors, including the leading sectors, the lagging sectors, as well as in the financial, I mean the SME sectors. On the financial inclusion, I think we address 2 things. First, on the financing side, because, you know, under after the COVID, then the credit worthiness of the SME, of course, is declining. That's why, you know, we have to address on the financing. Secondly, I agree with Philip and also with D3 that digitalization is quite important. Transformation on digitalization, especially how to bring the SME sectors, into the digitalization, both for in terms of digitalization of e-commerce and also a payment as well as digitalization of the financing for the SME sector. On the crypto asset, I think this is discussion still going on, and in the G20, I think we appreciate the paper that issued by FSP, but I think in the context of emerging economies, we should put the crypto regulation back to the financial regulators. I mean, in some countries, Indonesia, for example, crypto is under a commodity. It's not the financial asset. This is this kind of commodity asset. Why we need to put back to the financial regulator? Because the impact of the crypto, the race to financial stability is high. That's why this should be regulated by the financial regulator. Second, I think we have to strengthen the consumer protection for the cryptocurrency. And the third is how to minimize the impact of crypto to destabilizing capital flows, especially in the emerging market where the supply and the demand of foreign currency is quite important in maintaining the stability of the currency. That's on the crypto asset. And finally, I think certainly CBDC is another issue that we should address together in G20. We actively sparked the conversation on this issue in the Italy presidency last year, and we think we need to further discussion on understanding the implication of the macro financial implication of CBDC, as well as to exchange experience among the members. We appreciate recently, I think a couple of days ago, IMF just issued a paper on the behind the scene of the 6 countries on the CBDC. I think we quite welcome on this issue, and we are looking forward to discuss more further on CBDC and G20 forum. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yuda, and I do agree with you that on the last point you made, that and I think it's a point that others have made in this discussion and elsewhere, that it is important to explore with thoroughly the implication of CBDCs, and I think this might be a theme for another session. But my point would be it is important to proceed with full understanding of the various implications, especially macro implications, as you mentioned, because there is a danger that we look at the issue of the CBDCs only from the technological point of view, which is of course important. It's an essential part of it, but it is also important that we maintain a clear view of where we are heading forward, because that's really the main question. The financial question is more important than the underlying technology question. And thank you for bringing to this panel the point of view of emerging economies and mentioning various things that I think are relevant for looking at the current issue from a truly global point of view, including the various feedback loops you have alluded to. And I mean, you mentioned various things, but let me comment on one, which is, again, financial inclusion. And I think that financial inclusion is perhaps it's perceived as an issue more in emerging economies that in advanced economies, but it is an issue everywhere, including in advanced economy. And I can testify from our own experience in Italy that we are playing an increasing role in the financial system as a whole, in terms of financial protection, financial inclusion, and financial education. They're all things where we are ever more busy, ever more busy, because I think that there is a demand for action in these fields. That is very strong in advanced economies as well. And you said, and of course financial inclusion has various dimensions, because one of course is one dimension is income differences, another is education differences, and another is very simply age differences. There is no denying that people my age are slower in being able to exploit the potential of new technologies that people that are my children's age. So all those things have to be kept into account when we talk about financial inclusion. Now we are supposed to have a question and answer session. We have actually theoretically reached the end of our allotted time, but since we started with some delay, I think that we can allow I would say not more than a couple of questions from the audience, if there are any, and then I'll give the floor to the speakers for answering those questions or commenting on each other's speeches if they want to. Are there any questions from the floor? Please, the lady in the second row.
Thank you. Thank you for all the very good presentations. I have very short questions. Thank you, Mr. Knott. I already heard how Financial Stability Board is doing to try to figure out that digital transformation will benefit the society at large. My question is, there are, aside from what you've mentioned about live learning process, what you've mentioned about all the financial inclusion and so forth, there are novel risks of security issues, new and advanced, faster, accelerated technology issues and so forth. Is there any study that the Financial Stability Board already done? I just want to know about that because I always follow all the issues. And secondly, Pak Yuda, maybe I can ask you a question because as we all know that the acceleration of digitalization, especially CDBC, central banks have been one of the leading sectors to adopt this new technology. Do you think there are any other very short answers for future actions needed, future strategy, so the CDBC that are going to be issued or going to be introduced by some countries will benefit others rather than threatening others who are not yet ready to issue CDBC. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe one other question if there is one. I don't see any hands raised. So in that case, I would like to give the floor first to Dietrich. I think that he was the one, there was a question that was addressed to you, Dietrich, and then the others will have the chance to make a few final comments. Dietrich, and answer the question as well.
Thanks, Federico, and thanks for this question. Well, the FSB has, through a dedicated group, followed rapid advances in financial technology over the past couple of years, and on a number of occasions published reports that provide an overview of trends or look into specific areas. Our current focus, as I mentioned, is on the crypto asset ecosystem in its various forms and guises, and we just published our risk assessment on financial stability risks from crypto assets. Now, I think looking ahead, what seems to be the case is that that decentralized finance brings together many of new technological applications, smart contracts, AI applications, and decentralized ledger technology. So we'll be working with in terms of analysis with a focus on that in the coming months, and share any insights that we gain from that with our members at G20, and of course then also with the wider public. Thank you.
Thank you. Yuda, do you want to intervene now?
Yeah. Yeah, I think everybody is now preparing for the CBDC. It's kind of something that we cannot avoid, in the future, because digitalization in the economy and financial sector has been growing very fast. That's why the central bank needs to facilitate the transaction in the future. That's why CBDC is something that we have to prepare. And if we look at the BIS paper survey on the countries, that 80% of central bank has been conducting research, preparing for the CBDC. In terms of technology, and I think there are many options, and and also in the whether wholesale versus retail CBDC is still under discussion, pros and cons, cost and benefit of that. And we are in the Bank Indonesia also already started this study on the CBDC, and as well as the implication for the monetary policy, implication on the financial stability, and so on. So, because the design of CBDC will determine how we conduct the monetary policy. For example, whether CBDC is a kind of interest-bearing asset or zero interest. This, of course, will affect the way we conduct the monetary policy and the implication on the financial stability. Of course, if the interest is positive, then there is a risk of this intermediation from commercial to the central bank. So this discussion is still going on in Bank Indonesia, and of course we need to sharing the experience from country that already have kind of pilot project on this, like China and Swedish central bank, and other central bank like Bahama, Eastern Caribbean, and so on. Maybe my answer is.
Okay, thank you. As I said, I very much agree with you that we need further reflection on that. The not just the first round, but the second round, the third round implications of this kind of operation. Philip, I don't know whether you want to add some final remarks.
I can, thank you. I want to also thank you for recognising the Aboriginal art behind me, because I think the First Nations people of Australia have a huge amount to teach us about sustainability. I hope you also noticed the memorial pole between the Australian flag and the Aboriginal flag. That comes from East Arnhem Land, which is up in the northern part of Australia, and in fact it's closer to where you are in Jakarta than where I am in Sydney. I think it's a symbol of the connection between our countries. In terms of the substance of the issues we've been talking about, just want to follow up a couple of points. The first of those is on climate change and financing climate change. Dietrich talked about this. The financial sector has a huge role to play here, but we know that the financial sector can only play that role if it's got the information. It's got many years of experience where financial institutions can't play their role properly if they don't have the information. And when they don't have it, they restrict credit or they price it inappropriately. And there's a real risk that that can happen in this space as well. So the collective effort we're all pursuing at the moment to improve information in this space is really important. That involves the work that central banks are doing on stress tests, the disclosure by private companies about how they're managing climate risks, and the taxonomies. So I think as a group, we need to keep a focus on those things. Otherwise, the financial sector will not be able to play the role that it can play in financing the transition to the green economy. The last point I wanted to make was on central bank digital currencies. Reserve Bank of Australia, like many other central banks, is undertaking a lot of experiments. I think we're a long way from the point of issuing a central bank digital currency for retail purposes. There are still technology issues to work out, but as Luigi's been saying, there are significant public policy issues to work through as well. I think the most likely cases for central bank digital currencies are going to be in the wholesale space. In a way, central banks already issue a digital currency that's electronic settlement balances. So it's not too far a stretch to issue other forms of settlement balances that can be used in closed systems, either with smart contracts or some other set of arrangements. So we're currently exploring how that would work for retail, for wholesale purposes. And the explorations we're doing suggest there are some business cases that might be worth developing there. But on the retail level, I think it's still some way away. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I would like to thank the participants in this panel discussion, Philip Lowe, Dietrich Domanski, and Yuda Agung. I think, well, first of all, as moderator, for their very good self-discipline in sticking to the allotted time. So even if we started with some delay, we have not added to the delay during this our discussion. But above all, for the various interesting and thought-provoking remarks that they made, which I think leave every one of us a bit wiser than before. So. If you want to show your appreciation for the panelists, please do so now. And let me add that I wish to thank very much the Indonesian presidency for convening this. First of all, for the organization of this G20 meeting, but also for convening this event of ours, which I think we profited from, every one of us. Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. For Bapak Juda Agung and moderator, you may return to your seat. Ladies and gentlemen, now we have finally reached the end of our discussion, high-level discussion for today. We thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, Bapak Ibu sekalian, for sharing your time with us today. Hopefully, it was an informative and interesting session for all of you, as it was for all of us here in Jakarta. Convention Center. On behalf of Bank Indonesia and all Committee of Indonesia G20 Presidency, allow me, Banca D'Italia, to sign off, and we hope to see you again soon on another G20 events. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.